Allah Hafiz, everyone. Allah Hafiz. Hi, Elaine, you made it. Good job. Nabijan, Allah Hafiz, how are you? Good to see you. I love Fajan. I love Nabijan. How are you? Good to see you.
Hello.
Hi, Nabijan, how are you? Excellent. Good to see you.
Friend, sorry about the wait. Ajit's having a slight technical issue. He may just need to leave the meeting and come back in a second. So hopefully we'll be up and running shortly.
All right, so do I have 1 minute also?
Looks like you do.
So I don't know everybody on the call, but maybe it'd be fun to go around and say what city we live in. I'll start. Austin, Texas.
Houston, Texas.
Well, as my name says, it's in Austin, Texas. So here with you, Nabil.
Just west of Austin, Texas.
Deanna McCollum, Houston, Texas.
Norma Koshman. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jan. Norma Koshman, San Antonio.
Well, good to see you, Norma.
Mwah. You too also.
Aloha.
Aloha.
Houston, Texas.
Marge Delaney, and I'm in Allentown, New Jersey right now, but I'm usually in Austin, Texas.
March, how are you doing? How did you weather the storm?
We were very lucky, but people in towns around us were not so lucky. So, but we're fine, high and dry. But thank you for asking.
Glad to hear you're okay.
I'm Jane, and I'm in Marble Falls, Texas.
I'm Jen Erspeld, and I'm in Austin, Texas.
I'm Barbara, and I'm in Houston.
So everyone is from Texas. I'm Michael, and I'm in Philadelphia.
Pennsylvania got some of that storm too, right, Michael?
Yes, yes.
How did you weather it?
Not where we live, because our house is on a small mountain, but many areas near Philadelphia, in Pennsylvania, are in very, very bad shape.
Yeah, I think it took everyone by surprise that it still packed such a punch.
All right, I think I got back in. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Hear you.
Isn't technology wonderful? So friends, has Adib introduced Dr. Sergeev to you guys already, or has he not?
No, not yet. We were going around making introductions and that kind of thing.
Okay.
So good timing.
Okay. Well, let me say how honored and joyous it is to have Dr. Mikhail Sergeev with us today. He's a well-known scholar of the Wilmette Institute. He gives talks there all the time. And there is a new publication coming out that Robert Stockman has edited, where Dr. Sergeev has several articles in it. And I'm excited about it. One of these days, this book will be printed and available, I think, in January. Is that correct, Mikhail?
I think now in December of this year.
Okay, so I'm looking forward to me reading that, acquiring that. But regarding Dr. Sergeev, he has a PhD in philosophy of religion from Temple University in Philadelphia. He is an adjunct professor of the history of religions, philosophy, and contemporary art at the University of Arts in Philadelphia. He has served as co-chair of the Department of Religion, Philosophy, and Theology at Wilmette Institute. He is the author of more than 200 scholarly, journalistic, and creative works published in the United States, Canada, Japan, Poland, Greece, and the Czech Republic, the Netherlands, Uzbekistan, and Russia. Some of his articles have been translated into Polish and Japanese, and his books have been reviewed in Germany, Japan, Poland, Russia, Slovakia, and the United States. He has authored and edited 12 books, including the monograph, Theory of Religious Cycles, Traditions, Modernity, and the Baha'i Faith. I am delighted. I am just honored to have Dr. Sergeev with us today. And I am going to turn it over to you, Mikhail. We're excited to hear you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ajit, for such a nice introduction. Thank you for inviting me. In order to make my talk, I have to share the screen because I have PowerPoint. So let me see whether it works. Okay. So please let me know whether you see my slide, which says Progress of the Soul, Baha'i Vision of Life After Death.
Yes.
Yes, in full screen.
Okay, and nothing else. I mean, because sometimes I have only your screen sharing, stop share, some kind of speakers, people, etc. You don't see anything of that?
No.
Okay. Just making sure everything is working properly. And how is my sound? Is it okay? No interruptions?
It's great.
Okay. So then let me begin. So my topic is Progress of the Soul, Baha'i Vision of Life After Death. But this is not simply a scholarly talk because I'm interested personally in this kind of topic, have been researching about life after death in various religions for a long time. And actually, I'm teaching a course at the University of the Arts that is called Afterlife, in which I compare and discuss visions of afterlife in various religions, including Hinduism, Buddhism, different versions of Christianity, Judaism, Islam, Baha'i faith, etc., including modern science. Today we are going to focus on a Baha'i vision of life after death. And let me start with some opening remarks about the concept of afterlife. The concept of afterlife plays, in my view, a truly unique and indispensable role in religious traditions that no other idea or belief could ever match, substitute, or challenge. Here is the reason why I think this is the case. We know that religion could flourish even without the concept of God, as in early Buddhism, for example, or in Jainism or in late Taoism, but no religion can dispense of the idea of afterlife. Every religion has, or should have, and does have the idea of spiritual liberation, whether it be called the salvation or enlightenment, salvation in Christianity or enlightenment in Buddhism, or spiritual liberation in Hinduism, or spiritual release, or maybe any other terms, but however you call it, this hope for life after death, that's what fuels religion, in my view, in many ways, because of the existential uniqueness of human beings. We are in such a unique existential position because, on the one hand, unlike animals, we are conscious of our own mortality. And on the other hand, unlike angels, we have no idea what awaits us after death. And this gap in knowledge between our self-consciousness and our inability to penetrate the mystery of afterlife produces a deep-seated anxiety in all of us, whether we are conscious of it or not. And religion, among other things, addresses this anxiety. And I think religion is the most powerful tool of addressing this anxiety, because science cannot do it, and art cannot do it. And when people, when society is getting less religious, I think inevitably the level of social anxiety is rising, and therefore, psychologists, psychotherapists, and psychiatrists start prospering. So the religions of the world offer to their followers three kinds of beliefs about afterlife. That's what we know from the history of religions. The first one is reincarnation, and this belief, it seems, comes from India. According to the idea of reincarnation after physical death, we come back to Earth to inhabit another body. Christianity preaches bodily resurrection. According to the idea of bodily resurrection, the soul cannot exist without the body. And after physical death, we will be resurrected at some point with our transformed, spiritualized bodies. And after divine judgment, we end up either in heaven or in hell. And finally, the third idea is the idea of spiritual immortality that was promoted, first of all, by classical Greek and Hellenistic philosophers. According to the idea of spiritual immortality after physical death, our spiritual soul continues its progress on the spiritual plane of existence. Now, after those opening remarks, let me move more specifically to the Baha'i teachings about the immortality of the soul and life after death. So the first thing I have to say is that it is impossible to discuss Baha'i views on the afterlife without knowing the basics of Baha'i philosophy and Baha'i worldview in general, because Baha'i ideas about afterlife are derived from more general ideas about the world and how it is structured, and let's say what kind of beings inhabit this world, etc., etc. So the first, for example, the first thing, sorry, I was asked to admit someone. So the first thing that we have to consider is the oneness of creation. According to Baha'i scriptures, the world of creation is unified and infinite, and it consists of two realms, material and spiritual. Material and spiritual. The material realm, which we know through sense perception, is what we call the world of nature. It is subject to a sound organization, to inviolable laws, to a perfect order, and to a consummate design from which it never departs, as Abdul Baha tells us in some answered questions. The material realm is paralleled and complemented by its spiritual counterpart, which the Baha'i scriptures call the Abha, or most glorious kingdom, which is infinite as and vast as the whole of material creation. Now, both material and spiritual realms are based on the hierarchy of gradations. The lowest from our material existence is represented by minerals, and in the ascending order is followed by the material compositions of plants, animals, and humans. Spiritual gradations or degrees that Abdul Baha lists include the spirit of vegetation and growth in plants, the power of the senses in animals, the rational spirit of human beings, the spirit of faith, and finally, the Holy Spirit, which is the mediator between God and his creation. This is also from some answered questions. Now, as Abdul Baha points out, the vegetative and animal spirits result from the combination of elements that are brought together in a single composition. Sorry, something is wrong here. Okay. Yes. Sorry about that. So from in a single composition. And after the separation and dissolution of these composed elements, will naturally cease to exist. Now, as for the human condition, Abdul Baha continues, our physical body may be compared to a mirror and the human spirit to the sun. So if the glass is shattered or the mirror destroyed, no harm befalls the outpouring rays of the sun, which continues unabated. This is also some answered questions by Abdul Baha. Now, it is evident from this brief account about human beings that human beings are in fact unique creatures of God, since we combine in our nature the fullness of both material and spiritual qualities. The complexity of our physical constitution represents the culmination of material life. And our immortal spirit, while standing at the threshold of spiritual life, has the potential of all the degrees of perfection inherent in human essence. Now, the most important conclusion, or the most important implication from this thought is that we have to specifically discuss the connection between the human body and the human spirit in order to understand the Baha'i idea of the afterlife. So that's what we are going to do. And let me start with the first sentence that you see here in my slide. According to Baha'i teachings, the human soul or spirit is not located inside the body because the soul is not a material entity. The human mind serves as the interface between the spiritual and material elements in human beings. And here comes the most philosophically important thesis that Abdul Baha advances. Baha'i texts affirm the supremacy of spirit over matter and view physical death as a prelude to the afterlife in the spiritual realm. What it means is that if you remember, or some of you may remember Descartes and his famous saying, I think, therefore I am, by which Descartes, the father of modern philosophy, separated our material body from our thinking spirit. And he affirmed that both our spirit and our body are two substances that are somehow connected with each other. Now, in Baha'i teachings, the philosophy of the human spirit is radically different. According to Abdul Baha, only the human spirit represents a true substance, and the body is not a substance by itself. It is an attribute of the human spirit or human soul, which is connected to the human soul and which is subject to composition and decomposition. But when the attribute disappears, the substance remains the same. So Baha'i texts compare death with the birth of a baby from a womb of her mother. Physical death is the birth of the maturing spirit from the bonds of its evolution in the womb of Mother Nature. Now, let us move on to our next slide, which is important because in order to talk about afterlife from a Baha'i perspective, we have to discuss epistemology, or the theory of knowledge, and we have to understand what are the limitations of human knowledge and whether we can have any knowledge about what awaits us after death. So Abdul Baha distinguishes between four sources of human knowledge: sensory perception, reason, tradition, or sacred tradition, and intuition or inspiration. Now, he argues that each one of those sources of human knowledge are liable to error and cannot be fully relied upon. So, for example, our sensory perception can betray us because we may see mirages in the desert, or we may see hallucinations or dreams without realizing that these are actually dreams and not part of reality. Our reason is much stronger as a source of knowledge. However, we are often making mistakes. And if we didn't make mistakes, then philosophers would have agreed with each other, but they are still argued for thousands of years. Sacred tradition is based on the interpretation of scriptures, but sacred tradition is written by human beings as well. And therefore, as centuries roll by, the misinterpretations multiply, and we cannot fully rely upon sacred traditions, especially when it comes to older religions, and we do not really know the source of those traditions. And finally, intuition or inspiration. Abdul Baha talks about intuition or inspiration as being almost the same thing, but I would like to differentiate between the two, because intuition is something that comes from me. I intuit. I intuit something by being in a deep state of meditation, while inspiration presupposes some action upon me. So someone or some kind of force inspires me to do something. But in both cases, we cannot be 100% sure whether our intuition is right. And the same with this, with inspiration, because we cannot rely on inspiration. It may be the inspiration of our lower self, lower desires that want to get some satisfactions. In addition to those general restrictions of human cognition, and Abdul Baha basically says that, yes, all four sources of human knowledge may be liable to error, so therefore it is better to combine them and to rely on four of them, not separately, but together. Still, he says that the best way to attain certainty in human knowledge is by relying on revelation, which is originated by the Holy Spirit. So in addition to those general restrictions of human cognition, Abdul Baha also mentions two other limitations of human knowledge. The first one refers to the knowledge of the essences of things, whether material or spiritual. Abdul Baha says that we are able to know only qualities of things, but we cannot penetrate the essences of things. The essences of things, including the essence of our own self, the essence of the universe, and the essence of God. All of these essences are completely unknowable, beyond human understanding. The second limitation of human knowledge involves the hierarchy of creation and the inability of lower forms of life to understand the higher ones. And this is a very important point, especially with respect to the afterlife. So Abdul Baha says that one thing is to look at the world from the human perspective. And our perspective is, of course, limited, but it is much broader than the perspective of the animal. The perspective of the animal is much broader, is different in quality from the perspective of, let's say, the insect or the plant. And although we as human beings represent the acme of material beings, in terms of our spiritual life, we are in the very beginning of the chain of spiritual beings. And since all other spiritual beings are higher than we are, therefore, we are not able to fully and adequately understand the spiritual world and those spiritual beings. Now, since death is basically a birth into the spiritual world, and Abdul Baha says that when we die, our spiritual senses, our spiritual means of cognition will be developed, will be fully developed. In our present situation with those spiritual instruments, organs of knowledge not being developed, obviously we cannot adequately understand what will await us after death. So for the reason of all those limitations, this is the summary of this very brief exposition of Baha'i epistemology. For the reason of all those limitations of human knowledge, we cannot fully grasp the nature of the spiritual realm and the conditions of life after death. You know, some people may be disappointed because in other religions, you know, you believe in heaven, in hell, you believe that you are going to heaven. You know, this seems like a certainty, something that you can rely upon. Other people may actually be rejoicing because the limitation of knowledge, the lack of knowledge gives us something for the imagination. We do not know what really will happen. Something will happen, but we'll see when it comes to that. Now, Baha'u'llah in his writings explicitly states that our spirit will continue after the death and dissolution of our physical body. So this is an explicit statement with no doubt and no questions about that. Let me see whether I can find the exact quotation from Baha'u'llah here. Just bear with me 1 second. I did not want to overwhelm you with quotations, so therefore I do not use them excessively. But this one seems to be very important. So let me repeat this again. The founder of the Baha'i faith, Baha'u'llah, attests with unmistakable clarity to the survival of the human soul after the death of physical body, and to the continuation of the soul's existence in the spiritual realm. He writes, and this is a quotation, "Know thou of a truth that the soul, after its separation from the body, will continue to progress until it attaineth the presence of God in a state and condition which neither the revolution of ages and centuries nor the changes and chances of this world can alter. It will endure as long as the kingdom of God, his sovereignty, his dominion and power will endure." This is the quotation from Gleanings, from the writings of Baha'u'llah. However, he explains in other texts and passages that it is better not to reveal fully, not to describe fully the nature of the soul after the death of the body. Here is another quotation. "The nature of the soul after death can never be described, nor is it meet and permissible to reveal its whole character to the eyes of man," also from Gleanings. Now, why? He clarifies that if we knew what awaits us after death, some people would have rejoiced to the point of actually willing to die immediately. They will commit suicide in order to, end this miserable worldly existence, while other people will be so scared and terrified of what will await them after this life that they will die because of this fear. So therefore, the idea is that, it is wiser not to reveal the mysteries of human physical death and his or her return. They would be revealed when our time, when our time will come, no sooner and no later. However, although we believe that our life will continue after death, and we obviously will not know exactly what kind of life would that be, we want to talk about this. And Baha'u'llah explains that references to heaven and hell and other terms like that in the Holy Scriptures of religions are to be understood symbolically or metaphorically, describing states of nearness to and distance from God. By the way, this is another term that needs some clarification. What does it mean to be near to God? Since obviously nearness and great distance from God assume some spatial relations, and God, of course, is beyond space and time. So obviously, even these terms of nearness to and distance from should be taken metaphorically and symbolically. Let me get back to the sentence. So references to heaven and hell in the Holy Scriptures should be understood symbolically, describing our state of spirit in relation to God in this world and in the realms beyond. Now, many philosophical and theological terms that in various religions refer to afterlife should also be reinterpreted rather as symbolic descriptions of spiritual realities. And Baha'u'llah and Abdul Baha apply this strategy to such terms as divine judgment, eternal death and eternal life, reincarnation, and bodily resurrection. So the ideas of reincarnation and bodily resurrection are reinterpreted, symbolically reinterpreted in Baha'i faith as being indicative simply of, let's say, in the case of reincarnation, of the return of qualities rather than the essence of the person. And in the case of bodily resurrection, also as a return of qualities rather than the essence of a specific person. What do Baha'i scriptures say about the progress of the soul after physical death? I take all those statements that you see here in the slide from Abdul Baha's writings and utterances. My personal impression is that Abdul Baha describes the progress of the soul after physical death by using our knowledge of our physical and material reality. For example, it says the human soul remains in the degree of purity to which it has evolved during life in the physical body. So when we progress in our physical body, we progress physically, materially, socially, but also spiritually. And that spiritual progress remains with us while everything else, our social position, our wealth, health, etc., will die along with the physical body. Number two, Abdul Baha says that human soul has an innate individuality and could never evolve into something other than itself. Now, there are 4 theories nowadays about the so-called individuality, or let's call it our human self. The first theory is a religious theory, and Baha'i views actually share this theory that human soul is individual, it is not material, it progresses in the spiritual world. The second theory is the psychological theory, first advanced by John Locke in the second part of the 17th century. And it is now the most commonly accepted theory, as far as I know, among psychologists and some philosophers. According to psychological continuity theory, what we call the human soul or human individuality is basically the sum of our memories, our experiences, emotions, thoughts, will, etc. Everything that constitutes our character. Now, some people call it psychological pattern. So this psychological pattern is individual. It is related to our human body. It is based on our human biology, but it could be transferred to another platform, let's say a computer platform, and it could therefore evolve there. So hence the ideas of transhumanism and the so-called singularity, the merging of human biology and computer technology. And finally, the two other theories about human nature is that human individuality comes from the combination of subatomic particles in our body. And it is obviously false, because according to contemporary science, we know that every 7 years, our all of our material physical body is completely recycled. And for example, if you, God forbid, are addicted to drugs and want to have kids, you have to wait for 7 years. You have to be clean for 7 years before your body is completely recycled. Then you can conceive a healthy human child. So the whole human body will be different in 7 years, but your self-consciousness and your self of identity still remains the same. So therefore, even hardcore atheists do not believe that. And the fourth theory of human nature is that it does not exist a priori. So it is an illusion. It is a mental construct that is part of our biological evolution, and it ceases to exist with our death. So this was just a footnote. According to Baha'i teachings, our body that is not the seed of our individuality. It is our self that has an innate individuality, and therefore will continue its evolution on the spiritual plane, but will never be able to evolve into someone else. So as a spiritual reality, the human soul is not subject to material limitations, especially decline and death. That's what Abdul Baha says, and there is an important implications of that. It means that when we die and we progress spiritually, we cannot go backward. We can only move forward. So we can move forward speedily, or we can move forward less speedily, but the only movement is the movement forward. And I think that is also proved by our intellectual endeavors. In scientific endeavors, we only move forward and forward and forward, and so and the same is with religion, with progressive revelation. Now, in some answered questions, Abdul Baha also says, I quote, "Progress of the human spirit in the divine world is either purely through the grace and bounty of the Lord, or through the intercession and prayers of other human souls, or through the significant contributions and charitable deeds which are offered in its name." In my opinion, one of the main points of this idea is that the spiritual world is not organized as a physical world where we have laws of nature that we cannot escape. And our body is growing according to those laws of biological nature, going through certain stages from childhood to adulthood, then aging and death. So there are no such laws in the spiritual world. The spiritual progress is qualitatively different from the physical progress. It is not that you will progress no matter what, no matter whether you want this or not, like you progress in the physical world. If you don't want to become an adult, you will still become an adult. So the spiritual world, according to Abdul Baha, seems to be different. It is through the progress is optional, basically. It's not necessary. And the progress happens either through the help of God or through the help of other human souls. Now, finally, Abdul Baha says that in the afterlife, human souls will acquire spiritual means of perception and will be able to recognize and communicate with their friends and loved ones. This is actually very common to all religions. All religious teachings in some way or another believe that when we die, we will see our relatives. Recently, someone asked me a question about whether, let's say, if someone dies, this person will be able to recognize and communicate with, let's say, their husband who committed suicide, or with someone who committed another sin. Obviously, I do not have any definite answer. And frankly, I do not know the position of the Universal House of Justice about euthanasia or suicide. I know that no religion, practically no religion, approves of suicide. All religions condemn suicide in some way or another. Only Jainism, a very ancient Indian religion, is tolerating suicide, probably because one of the versions of their founder's death, Mahavira, is that Mahavira died as a result of over fasting. He fasted so much that he died of starvation. But all other religions forbid or condemn suicide. But from what I understand, here is the physical world. And in the physical world, there are people who have different qualities, who have different lifestyles, who have different professions and occupations, different callings. Some of us are, serial killers, and the others are great scientists. And at the same time, we can meet each other on this physical plane of existence. The fact that some people are better than others or worse than others does not preclude us from communicating with other people. And since the spiritual world is basically the counterpart of the physical world, I would assume that the spiritual world will be structured the same way, namely that we will all be dwelling on the spiritual realm, whatever that means, and we will be able to communicate with everyone, no matter how sinful or how saintly those beings are. But this is simply a conjecture. Now, in his utterances and writings and speeches, Abdu'l-Baha offers a number of arguments against the possibility of reincarnation. Here we come to the second part of my presentation. Baha'i teachings not only present a general review of what may happen in the afterlife, they do not only give us some philosophical foundation for those views, but they also provide some philosophical arguments, rational arguments against reincarnation when it is taken literally, and also for the immortality of the spirit, the idea that Abdu'l-Baha and Baha'i teachings promote. So here are some arguments by Abdu'l-Baha against the possibility of reincarnation, but let me mention that reincarnation in this case is the concept that is taken literally, like it is taken by many Hindus and Buddhists and Sikhs and Jainists. So I arranged those arguments in their logical form, the premises and conclusion that comes from those premises. And I will briefly discuss those arguments one by one. So this is argument number one. And the first premise is that the outward is the expression of the inward. The earth is the mirror of the kingdom. The material world corresponds to the spiritual world. This is one of the major points of Baha'i view of reality. The second premise is that in the sensible world, appearances are not repeated, for no being in any respect is identical with, nor the same as another being. And therefore, Abdu'l-Baha comes to a conclusion that reincarnation, which is the repeated appearance of the same spirit with its former essence and condition in the same world of appearance, is impossible and unrealizable. Argument number 2. Change of nature is impossible through renewal and return, since matter always remains in the state of imperfection, meaning that this imperfection is compared to the state of perfection of God. Hence, it is evident that returning and coming back to the material world does not become the cause of perfection, as reincarnationists claim. Argument number 3. According to the views of reincarnationists, we come back to earthly life in order to ripe out our rewards and punishments. However, no one is happy, which is quite true. But everybody is suffering on earth. Therefore, reincarnationists must be wrong. Argument number 4. Advancing and moving in the worlds in a direct order according to the natural law is the cause of existence. And a movement contrary to the system and law of nature is the cause of non-existence. The return of the soul after death is contrary to the natural movement and opposed to the divine system. Therefore, reincarnation is impossible. Argument number 5 is rather emotional, I would say, than rational. The material world is imperfect. Who then would like to be reincarnated again in such an imperfect world? Yeah, personally, I completely agree. And I always tell my students that I would prefer not to get reincarnated. One time is enough. Argument number 6. Believers in reincarnation consider the body as a vessel in which the spirit is contained, as water is contained in a cup. This water has been taken from one cup and poured into another. However, as Baha'i teachings tell us, the spirit is an incorporeal being and does not enter and come forth, but is only connected with the body as the sun is with the mirror. Therefore, reincarnation is impossible. Argument number 7. According to reincarnationists, each must receive his due either in the present or future life. But this would make spiritual progress depend on humans themselves and not on God's supreme and special influence. Now, I will conclude my presentation with some arguments for the immortality of the human soul. I did a special lecture about that, and in that lecture, I compiled all the arguments, at least all the arguments I found in Abdu'l-Baha's writings, arguments in favor for the spiritual immortality of the soul. There are many of them. Here in this presentation, I will confine myself only to some brief remarks. The first one is that in his works and public addresses, Abdu'l-Baha discusses a series of rational proofs of the immortality of the soul. But when presenting his arguments to his audiences, he always goes to the heart of the matter and never mentions any other philosophers, his predecessors, who devoted some works, some particular works, to the discussion of the arguments of the immortality of the soul. I mainly refer to Plato and his dialogue Phaedo, in which Socrates discusses 4 classical arguments for the immortality of the soul before he drinks poison, and Cicero, a Hellenistic philosopher and an ardent defender of the Roman Republic, who, after losing his daughter, his favorite daughter, mourned for a while, retired to one of his estates, and wrote a book which is called Tusculan Disputations. In the first chapter of this book, Cicero presents 6 or 7 arguments for the immortality of the soul that are not derived from Plato. Now, Abdu'l-Baha, when he is giving his arguments, he does not mention the names of Plato or Cicero, and we do not know whether he was familiar with their writings or not, but only a few of his arguments actually echo the arguments of his predecessor. Most of his arguments are unique and creative, and he produces much more than both Plato and Cicero combined. Now, to begin with, Abdu'l-Baha distinguishes between traditional and rational proofs. The first ones stemming from belief in God and Holy Scriptures. These are traditional proofs, because a believer cannot imagine that human life does not continue after death. And, imagining that your life will end with the end of your body is tantamount to questioning God himself. As for the rational proofs of the immortality of the soul, Abdu'l-Baha offers a series of them to his readers, but I will just give you one example of such argument in its logical form. So I call this argument human spirit not being part of physical body. The first premise is quite clear: material existence is subject to composition and decomposition. Anything in the world of matter is either in the state of composition or in the state of decomposition. Now, the second premise is trying to show that human spirit is not part of material body. Abdu'l-Baha says that human spirit is not a material entity because, and in various writings, he gives some sub-arguments of this argument. So it is not a material entity because its power persists while the person is asleep and the body is resting. Because changes in the body, including amputations of bodily organs, do not affect the spirit. Because it is not available to our senses. Because the body itself does not produce thought, which is the characteristic feature of human mind or spirit. Because man is not a captive of nature and can discover its secret. So since human spirit does not seem to be part of material reality, and only material reality is subject to composition and decomposition, therefore, Abdu'l-Baha concludes that human spirit should not be subject to decomposition and therefore should be immortal. This argument comes from some answered questions. So these are my references, first of all, from Baha'i texts, Baha'i scriptures, and these are some books and articles for further reading. So with this, I would conclude my presentation. I hope it did not take much time. And now I'm ready for questions and discussions. Thank you.
Thank you.
Should I stop sharing the screen?
Sure, that would be good. Friends, there's some of you here on Zoom, and there is some of you on YouTube. For those of you that are here on Zoom, please put your question in chat. Type it in, and I will read it to Dr. Sergeev. If you are out there in the YouTube world, send me a text message with your question, and I will read it out for Dr. Sergeev.
Yeah.
My phone number is for YouTubers, 281-788-0380. I would like to start out with a question, if I could ask it.
Please.
May I? I'm very interested in your background. How does and by the way, growing up a Hindu, the reincarnation stuff, just comes home. I want to know how someone who grew up in the USSR, born there, educated there, came to be a person of faith, a person of religion, and a Baha'i.
Look, this is a question that requires probably another session. But I will have to be very brief. Yes, I was born and raised in the Soviet Union. My father came from the Orthodox Christian family. My mother came from the Orthodox Jewish family. But my education was not religious, but purely secular. I went through Soviet secular school and then Soviet secular, a very politicized university. And my ideology was communist and Soviet. That's how I was raised. Part of it was atheism. Since, all around me, all people around me were atheists, I did not question that until I was older already. But, some of the issues of atheism always bothered me. Like, for example, I could not understand, even when I was like 12 years old, I couldn't understand how people around me are so happy when they believe that they will die and nothing will remain of them. So that I couldn't understand. I thought that if you really believe that, you should go nuts immediately after that. The second thing that was strange to me was that how atheism as a belief system could produce the moral code that we were taught, the moral code of the communist builder. Because if you believe that everyone dies, then what's the point of building anything? Now, I haven't read the Bible back then, so I was not familiar with the Apostle Paul, who was saying that if you don't believe in Christ, so let's drink and be jolly. But similar thoughts came to my mind, but they did not crack my belief system, although they bothered me, seriously bothered me. My problem came with not with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, but with the dissolution of the communist ideology inside my mind, which happened when I encountered real life. So all I was taught in school came into a serious contradiction with the real life I experienced in the university and after the university when I started working. So my disillusionment in communism then created a serious existential problem for me, because the Soviet identity played the role of religious identity. It was very deep, and going into the center of the self, it gave you the meaning of life overall. That's what religion does. And when that disappeared, then I was faced with the choice of finding a new identity. And my new identity was very, very strange. Partly Jewish, partly Christian. I couldn't come either to Judaism or to Christianity as a person who is, as Russians say it, half-breed. So I personally believe that the more we have intermarriages, the more people we have who share inside themselves different religious traditions, the more people will come to Baha'i faith. Because I was looking for a religion that would give me an umbrella identity for all of my experience. Religion. Hello?
Keep going.
Is my sound okay?
Yeah.
So a religion that would give me an umbrella identity for all my experiences, both religious and secular. That's why I started my study of religion, and I studied diligently for 20 or 30 years. And after studying all religious systems, Baha'i seems to be the only solution to the problem.
Thank you.
This is a very, very brief summary.
Other questions or thoughts from anybody?
I see someone is writing in chat.
There is one, this is Elaine. There is one that puzzles me. Is when they speak about the body and the soul separating at death. If the soul is not part of the body, why would it separate?
Well, we do not know how it is connected to the body. That's the problem. It is connected somehow, but it is not part of the body. But the difficulty is that we know nothing about the spiritual world. Science cannot tell us anything about the spiritual world. And therefore, we have no idea, about the connection between the material and spiritual world that could exist theoretically. At this point, we are coming to our research about the brain. And we assume that the thought is generated by the brain. And we may assume that with the death of the brain, everything that we call ourself dies. But this is simply a hypothesis, a scientific hypothesis, which should be either rejected or accepted on the basis of experiments. But experiments at this point cannot go as far as we would like to. I know from my studies of parapsychology and occultism that those people believe that there is some kind of a cord, umbilical cord. Like when we are born into this world, there is a cord that connects us with our mother, and it should be cut. And that a similar cord exists between the soul and our body. And, in near-death experiences, when people see their relatives and talk to a great spirit, etc., at some point, they approach the threshold and they realize that if they pass the threshold, they will not be able to come back. So the connection is completely over. But in most cases, they are told to come back, and therefore they come back to their body. So some kind of connection exists. That's why it should be separated.
Another question is, how will we recognize our friends or our relatives in the next world Will it be an imprint, a feeling, or an imprint of what they look like on this earth that will stay with us? And we will still see them the way we see them now?
Good question.
Yeah, obviously, personally, I have no answer, but first I might draw on Abdul Baha, who says that our communication with the spirits is spiritual. It is not like communication in the physical world. It is like a communication in a dream. So therefore, our spiritual communication may be like that, number one. Number two, I may, draw on some near-death experiences. Those people who had near-death experiences told that they really saw their relatives in their human form, I mean, like a hologram. So that's why they recognize them. So it's not because of their voice, because of the thought, but simply because of the appearance. So therefore, these are two possible answers, but nobody knows.
Okay.
Thank
you. There's a comment here from Bijan Masumian. He says, another argument against reincarnation is that no one I know seems to have any memory of a past life. So how are we supposed to learn from our past mistakes and release ourselves from the vicious cycles of rebirth if we can't remember our past lives and past mistakes?
Yeah.
This becomes even more of a problem if we are transmigrated into a lower life form.
Yes, that is a good argument. I can respond from the Hindu and Buddhist perspective. Number one, there are many Tibetan Buddhist monks that claim that they do remember their past lives. But we cannot either prove or disprove that. In Florida, there is one psychologist who does past life regression therapy. And he believes that some of our traumas and bad thoughts and feelings come not from childhood, but from our past lives. However, his research is not recognized as scientific by the American Psychological Association. Also, yes, you don't have to remember your past mistakes in order to learn, because you may learn by having certain, how shall I say, when we are facing some choice, we always have some intuition of, what is right and what is wrong. This intuition may be the indication of your past mistake and of what you should do now. These would be probably possible arguments for the reincarnation. It is a controversial topic because some scientists are trying to understand reincarnation, not literally, but as a psychological phenomena. For example, we can explain the memories of past lives by the hypothesis that we all are interconnected intellectually, and that there is a memory bank of all people who ever lived on Earth. And if you have access to this memory bank, you can actually remember things that you never experienced. So this is all I can say.
Can I make a comment, Dr. Sergeev? Growing up a Hindu, one of my biggest problems was with reincarnation. That's why I walked away from Hinduism.
Mm-hmm. You did not want to become
no.
a tree.
No, my problem was very different. My problem was growing up in a country full of poverty and misery.
Yeah.
And my desire to help somebody who is miserable and poor and hungry. And my elders telling me, you shouldn't help them. They're suffering for their past life and their past deeds. Therefore, if you help them and make their life easier, you're prolonging the suffering. And I intuitively did not accept that argument. I could not accept that argument. I felt as a human being, I should help somebody if I could.
Yeah.
And that was my biggest argument against reincarnation. I mean, I just didn't accept reincarnation.
Yeah, that is a good argument. And it is true that the ideas of karma and reincarnation tend to create more conservative societies, less flexible. Yes.
That certainly described how I grew up. Other thoughts and questions, dear friends? This has been a wonderful, exciting, and enlightening presentation, Dr. Sergeev. And I think all of us are looking forward to your presentation at the Wilmette Institute and joining you there, and also reading your writings, your chapters that you have submitted that will be available to us, I think this summer you said, or January, right? Dr. Stockman's compilation.
Yeah, but it costs a fortune.
Yeah, it does, but one of my friends here on this thing told me if you order early, you save $50.
Okay.
He's not commenting, but yes, this is true. I will at least order one.
Okay.
Anybody else have any thoughts? Thank you very much, Mikhail, for agreeing to do that as I come back. I want you all to know that this talk has been recorded on YouTube and will be available on the Austin Assembly's website. And I hope you will all distribute this to all your friends, because I heard this wonderful, for those of you that don't know much about the faith or the personalities in the faith, one of the tremendous personalities in our faith was a woman named Ruya Khanum. And Ruya Khanum many a times told people in her talks that you should insist on bringing up the topic of life after death with people, because that is a topic that everybody wants to know about, and that we should be bringing this topic to everybody's attention, the Baha'i views on the subject. And certainly you have presented this so concisely and precisely that I think all of us will gain by going back to this talk and listening to it again and again. So thank you very much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, thank you, thank you. Wonderful presentation, and I will share it. Thank you.
Can I also